we as a society, again, have a difficult time saying to the face of someone who appears to be rich and successful, you're lying to me, right? And he has no problem lying to your face, even when you know he's lying to your face. And you put those two things together, and he creates a fantasy world that he inhabits.
Yeah. And he believes in the power of the lie. If the lie is said over and over and over, it eventually becomes fact. People will start to think it's true.
Suzanne Craig and Russ Buettner are Pulitzer Prize-winning reporters from the New York Times. They're out with a new book, Lucky Loser, How Donald Trump Squandered His Father's Fortune and Created the Illusion of Success, which is getting rave reviews, and for good reason. It's a deeply reported and really fascinating look at Trump's career and how a series of incredible breaks created the man we know today, a man who may once again be elected president of the United States this November. Suzanne and Russ, thanks so much for coming on Press Club.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
First off, let's start with you, Suzanne. Tell us why you set out to write this book.
I think this book actually starts as a story in the New York Times newsroom. Russ and I were working in the Metro section in 2016. I was down at City Hall. I'd actually just landed down there from Albany. I was City Hall bureau chief. I'd been there about 3 weeks, and got a call saying, Donald Trump's entered the race, and we'd like you to write a story. In my case, I was looking at just what he owned or didn't own in New York. There wasn't a lot known about his businesses at the time. It's a privately held company. There's not a lot of people there. And Donald Trump had promised he was going to release his tax returns. We were sort of waiting for that. But Russ and I each dived into different aspects of his career and started looking at it. And we did that throughout 2016. And we just kept finding different stories. And then one of the, I think, significant stories we found, because Donald Trump never did release his tax returns, is one afternoon I was in the newsroom in September of 2016. It was a Friday afternoon, and I went to my mailbox, and there was a manila envelope there, and inside of it was 3 pages of Donald Trump's 1995 tax returns. And we didn't know if it was true or not. We had a lot of work to do to confirm it. But when we looked down, it looked like his losses for that year totaled almost $1 billion. We couldn't believe it, and we worked round the clock. We were able to confirm it. We got it to press. And then we just kept reporting on his finances, and we got a lot of information on his father's finances and how much money his father had. And that turned out to be a lot of the money that Donald Trump inherited. And we found out there was tax fraud that went on in that, and that was from a trove of documents that Mary Trump had given us. At that point, nobody knew she was the source, and some additional reporting we did. That resulted in a story in 2018, and then we just kept going. We got a lot more tax information, and then Russ and I, in 2020, we realized we had a huge amount of information, but we sort of felt like it was a skeleton of an actual narrative that we could tell in book form, and so we started out on this book.
At the time in 2015, Trump's run wasn't really being taken seriously. What did you think when you were assigned this story about looking into his taxes? Because obviously, as we know, he was famously secretive about his money and how he made it.
Yeah, I mean, part of that happened because, in sort of a short window, because he had not been taken seriously. There was a very large field, you remember, in 2015, right. I think
17, 20, yeah.
Massive, right? And there was no thought that he would be dodging through that, through experienced politicians who had more money, who had better operations already built. But he did. They sort of like devoured themselves. And all of a sudden in early spring of 2016, there was a collective realization that this was really serious. It was going to be him. And we had a man who was almost 70 years old who was basing his campaign on a 50-year history in business that no one really knew anything for sure about. So that was a huge vacuum to step into, and we don't usually scrutinize presidential candidates who have that much time with no actual real documented record.
Right.
There was just what he said and no way to really check it. And as we've all learned, there's a huge gap between what he says and the truth of things.
What I think is interesting about this is it's easy to forget, but the holy grail of reporting at the early on in Trump's political career was the tax returns. It's what everyone was talking about.
It's funny because I think of all the stuff we've gotten when I remember that moment where we were able to get those 3 pages.
Yeah, what did that feel like when you got that?
It was such a huge moment, like nothing. Like it was explosive, and the reaction was just, I mean, we've gotten other stuff, but that story always to me seems like the one that was just like, wow.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing to remember about Donald Trump, when he became the Republican nominee, we hadn't really seen a president in history who had finances that were as complicated as this, where, the conflicts were just myriad that we could see even without having his taxes. And so it was really important to the paper to get under this, but just to even try to get our hands around it in that short period of time, was a lot, and that's why we spent so long doing it.
Right. Now, one of the big themes of this book is that Trump is not the self-made man that he claims he is. He inherited nearly $500 million from his father, Fred Trump. How did you figure that story out? And we'll start with you, Russ.
That was our 2018 story, was really the basis of that. And we obtained a trove of family financial records. It's since come out by her own accord that Mary Trump, Donald Trump's niece, supplied those records to us. We also did a massive scrape for property records and his sister's financial disclosure records, and we were able to put that all together and make basically a massive spreadsheet with inflation adjustments and modified if he had invested in the S&P 500 to come up with a grand tally through the years, year by year, of everything his father had given him and when. And then that really showed us the various ways also that his father had given him money. Some of which was loans that were supposed to be repaid and never were. Some of it was just gift money. Some of it was trust funds. He created his first trust fund when Donald was 3 years old that made Donald and his siblings the owner of land under some of Fred Trump's buildings, and then he paid them rent for the rest of their life to their trust funds.
Must be nice.
And some of it, right, and some of it was when Donald orchestrated, after their father had died, the sale of the entire empire, which the banks basically valued at close to $1 billion. Then, so that was a big undertaking. But all of these things too were like, there's a story to it beyond that we never could really tell before this book let us do. Like there's a succession battle in that family. And that's a huge part of Donald Trump's life and who he became. And in that you really see, even at a young age, the person that you would later see in the White House who seemed to just pop out of nowhere.
Right. I think that's the best part about this book, is that it captures the origin story of the Donald Trump that we know today. And so much, you're reading it through it, and so much that you see, you're like, oh, that's why he's like this, and that explains the man that we see in the White House. Expand upon that. What did you think when you were reporting out this book about what it showed about Trump's origin story and the man that it made? Yeah,
that's right. We knew a little bit about Donald Trump just from we've read some books on him that have been written before, but when we really started digging into the reporting, you start to see, like you said, the origin story. Like there's a couple anecdotes that right away come to mind. One of them is, the Trump family was quite wealthy and they belonged to a beach club near their place, and they would go there and play cards. They had a nice cabana on the beach. And one of the other members who was there, he was around Donald's age, he said he would remember Donald Trump would get to the pool and he would go up high on the diving board, and as people were going by the pool fully dressed, he would cannonball from the diving board and just spray everybody. And then he would deny it, and Sandy, the kid now Donald's age that we talked to, said he would deny it, but I saw it. And that was one. And then there was another one, because of all of Donald Trump's hijinks, he gets sent famously to the New York Military Academy, just outside of the city. And he goes there, and then we pick up stories. We start talking to the cadets that went to the New York Military Academy with him, and we talked to one of his friends who was there, a fellow named Michael Skadron. And Michael Skadron was in his room one day, and they were getting ready to go for class photo, for graduation photos. It was in the fall, and they were getting ready for the yearbook that would come. And Donald walks into his room and sees Michael's jacket, and it has more medals on it than Donald. And Donald asked if he could wear Michael's jacket for the class photo. So over and over, kind of almost page by page, we start to see the Donald Trump form, the one that we know today. We start to see all these incidents that are very familiar to people today. And he was doing it when he was 12, 15, 16.
Yeah. I've always thought that Trump's superpower, one of his superpowers, is a lack of shame. He's capable in a way that no other politician is standing up on a stage and saying 2 + 2 = 5. And a journalist will say, no, it isn't, it's 4. And he'll just look at them and say, you're wrong, it's 5. And that is not something anyone else is able to pull off. And as you demonstrate in this book, it's something that he's been doing since he was a kid at the swimming pool.
And that's what, just to get those first stories from people was incredible. Like to hear even, we talked to another woman who lived across the street and he was throwing rocks in her window. I mean, it was just, this was the kid that we kind of know today. These were the first, signs of that.
Right.
Ended, yeah.
Now, the thing that really ends up saving Trump in the later sort of phases of his career and life is The Apprentice. What was his financial situation at the time of when Mark Burnett, the super producer, came and pitched him on starring in this reality TV show?
I would sum it up as maybe like stagnant and generally trending downward, right? He had a complete collapse in about 1990. He had taken out almost $1 billion in loans that he couldn't repay. The banks made him sell off a whole bunch of stuff. He put his casinos through bankruptcy, the Plaza Hotel, which he had bought, through bankruptcy. And he couldn't really get loans after that to buy more big stuff. So he was trying to buy little things. He bought land and tried to turn it into golf courses. He'd had mixed success at that and really hadn't generated much profit. He had tried to put his name on some of other people's projects because he was recognized as very good at bringing attention to things, obviously, but that hadn't been a huge moneymaker. And his casinos were about to go into bankruptcy again, and he would have to come up with that year $50 million in order to keep any kind of stake in the casinos. And he was about to push his siblings into selling off their father's empire, which he didn't want to happen. The father didn't want that to happen. So that's where he was. Situation was kind of dire. He needed cash.
And in 1995, and this is one thing that you guys uncovered when you got all the tax documents, he had recorded more than $1 billion in business losses on his over the last 10 years.
Through that decade, yeah.
Through that decade, yeah. Put that into context with us. How big a loss is that in terms of someone of his wealth at the time? Was that devastating for him?
I don't think there is any context for that.
There's no context.
We found a database that was a sampling of large tax filers, right?
Yeah.
And it was anonymized, but we were able to sort of re-identify him because the numbers were so unique and so huge, and there was nothing even close to that. And part of that is because he very aggressively wrote off some of the money he had borrowed as a personal loss to himself. And we talked to accountants who said that may have been possible for a brief window of time, but probably wasn't. And he was sort of uniquely positioned to do that because of the amount of money he had borrowed and the staggering size of the failure that was all personal. It wasn't buried in a corporate balance sheet. I
think in 1 or 2 of those years, we found that he lost more money than any other individual taxpayer in America. This isn't just like he lost a lot of money and there's hundreds of others there. No.
Right.
We couldn't believe it when we went in and we found this. And his losses were singular for like every individual taxpayer in America.
And then The Apprentice comes along. How did that come together?
So in 2002, he meets Mark Burnett in an event at Woolman Rink. It was Mark Burnett is the famous producer that did Survivor, and he was there filming a finale of Survivor. And they briefly meet. And the event was at Woolman Rink, and Donald Trump was there. And then a year later, Mark Burnett is wanting now to do another. Survivor was like a red hot hit, and he wanted to see if he could do another one. He decides, okay, I want to do Survivor, but in the urban jungle. And for that, he needs a host. He needs a host of the show, somebody who young kids would want to, fight with and strive and connive in order to want to go work for that person. And Mark Burnett looked at a number of people. He thought maybe Jack Welch would want to do it, maybe Warren Buffett. Mark Burnett and his team came to the conclusion that they either weren't great for TV or they were too busy. Mm-hmm. And then he remembered Donald Trump, and he felt Donald Trump would have the charisma to do it. And I think probably genuinely thought Donald Trump was this hugely successful fellow. So Mark Burnett approaches Donald Trump, and it's an interesting story that maybe should have given Mark Burnett a clue that Donald Trump wasn't as successful as he was claiming. In Mark Burnett's telling of the story, he flies into New York and he's coming in to pitch Donald Trump, and he's hoping to have a couple weeks to get his stuff together. And so he calls Donald Trump wanting to set up that meeting for 2 weeks from the time, or 3 weeks from the time. And he calls Donald Trump's office and he says, "It's Mark Burnett." And he's put right through to Donald Trump. Donald Trump was there and had enough time to immediately take the call. And he says, "Come on over to Trump Tower right now." And Mark Burnett's kind of freaking out, thinking, "Oh my God, I was going to have 2 weeks to refine this pitch." He ends up an hour later in Donald Trump's office. They have a meeting, and according to Mark Burnett's telling of it, they come to an agreement where Donald Trump is going to do the show. At that point, he was going to be the host for a year. But the important thing that they agreed upon at that moment, Donald Trump would be paid, per show, but he would be able to split. Mark Burnett and Donald Trump would split the product integration money that the show would generate. And what that is, when you think of product integration, you think of a Coke can or a bag of Doritos. Mark Burnett had used this on Survivor, but so far, I think it was largely unrealized how much money you could make out of it, but they said, we'll split the product integration money if we get any from the show. So that became what became sort of just hugely lucrative for Donald Trump. But that deal between Mark Burnett and Donald Trump came together quite quickly.
Right. And as a show that focused a lot on product, because the contestants were selling products, that ended up making them millions and millions per episode.
Once season one was a hit, it took off $3-4 million an episode. It was incredible.
Now, Mark Burnett and his team were a little bit underwhelmed by Trump Tower when they first came to visit it. Could you tell us about that for us?
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing moment. Right? So these people had been filming in jungles, and they had very, well-trained eyes to find things that would evoke a certain emotion. In the jungles, that was always fear, because the whole thing of Survivor was that people were facing life-threatening, things, snakes and spiders and things. So they walk into Trump Tower thinking, now we're going to need this central figure of the show who's going to be the prize of the show, someone who's so wealthy and successful and knowledgeable that all these smart people will beat themselves to death to try to get a 1-year internship with
grovel at his feet for just the chance to work for him.
This is a huge bar to get over, right? And so they think when they walk in here, this is what they're going to see. They're just going to see wealth and prosperity and a humming, buzzing, thriving worldwide enterprise. And they step off the elevator, and the first thing they notice is it stinks. It just smells bad, right? The carpet smells like there's full of mold, and they look across the furniture and it's all chipped and there's nicks out of everything. And they go into the master of the universe's office expecting, again, this hub of worldwide activity. And they don't see, there's no computer, there are no blueprints, there's no files there. There's just piles, very orderly piles of newspaper clippings and magazine articles about one subject, Donald Trump, right? So they realize they have this very huge bar to get over. That first, this guy is not what they're going to bill him as. So they're going to have to invent that person. Mm-hmm. But they're also going to have to just invent a place that looks like a successful office place. So they hire someone to be a set designer and rent space from Donald Trump in one of the vacant floors of Trump Tower to build a boardroom and to build suites that would look like fancy places for the contestants to live.
Yeah.
So that's step one of building that illusion. Step two is you guys have this incredible detail about the opening segment of The Apprentice, where it's filming, there's the aerial shot with the helicopter filming all of these properties and describing them as gems of, the Trump organization, when really they're all in states of disrepair and on the verge of bankruptcy.
Right, like Trump Ice is there. There's
which is the water?
Trump Water, yeah.
Right.
And they've got one of the casinos and Seven Springs where he tried but failed, was still failing to get a golf course there. One by one, they go through them as if they're these crown jewels, and they're all they're all losing money.
And you also describe Trump as totally disengaged from the details and even the broad narrative of what's going on in this TV show that he's starring in. And he would often fire the totally wrong person that producers wanted him to fire at the end when they have the firing scene. You quote one member of the production team as saying, "Our job then was to reverse engineer the show and to make him not look like a complete moron. And again, myth building about Donald Trump, making it seem like he's this really good businessman, deal maker, manager. And what effect did that have? The making of The Apprentice and its success on creating this image of Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, you can see there's a good metric of that to begin with, to start off with. There was a Gallup survey that was conducted about 18 months before the show that measured well-known people's approval rating by the public. And Donald Trump, almost everyone knew who he was. It was like 98%. But the majority of people viewed him unfavorably, right? Based on all these bankruptcies and his marriages and infidelities being in the paper. 18 months after the show, they did it again, and his approval rating was, I think, about 50% in the public. That was an amazing jump during a period of time where nothing had happened other than he had been on television every week looking like a very competent, thoughtful, precise businessman. And that really captures the power of this segment they created that they called Meet the Billionaire to begin with, and then repeating this every week. That variations of that opened the show all the time and really reinvented his image, reinvented his finances as well. And that is an image of him that was locked in the public's mind,
right?
His supporters' mind through today.
We say it was the greatest political ad ever a lot. And
right.
Yeah, when we would talk about it when we were reporting the book, just how powerful that opening scene is. It's played in different variations, but just the power of that.
And even when you know all those things that they're saying about those properties are not true, it's like that thing is not doing well. He's going to go into bankruptcy on that. You're still like, well, this is really impressive though. It's really hard to fight that human impulse. And that's part of the magic of Mark Burnett.
And not to mention the money that he makes on The Apprentice. Funnily enough, the show is premised on this idea that he is already extraordinarily wealthy, that he's a billionaire. But then he gets one of the big windfalls of his life on the basis of that fantasy. And it creates this lore about him that he's this billionaire deal maker. That will end up being crucial for his 2016 run for president. So really this turned his life around, both financially and in creating this image of him.
It was like the second big windfall that he got. The first one was what he inherited from his father. And then this just extraordinary amount of money that he was able to make from The Apprentice. And it is really shocking because you think nobody really understood the mechanics of it. You have a host, he's paid whatever an episode, $100,000 if he's successful. But that product integration deal that they struck was just so lucrative for Trump. If a company was paying $4 million and it went up to $5 million, we got a lot of the financials for the show. We could see what each company was paying to get their product on the show. He would get half of that. And he didn't have any overhead. It was just, he wasn't paying for the production of the show. He was just getting half of that. And when the producers would come up and talk to him about the company that week that was going to be on, his first question was pretty much always, well, how much are they paying? Because he was getting half of it. And it wasn't just that, though. From that, he got licensing deals that came on top, that came because of The Apprentice. Those were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And also, if they also got a cut if the contestants made a shirt or made a product that the company that was paying to be on the show actually sold, he would get a cut of that potentially. So there was just so much money coming from many directions.
I think you also see the power of that reinvention in the licensing deals. Because just before this, he had been trying to do this.
And
he
it wasn't
approached
working.
a shirt company, and they laughed him out of the office, literally. And during the show, he suggested to Pontiac, well, GM should make a car named after me. And the executive he was talking to for Pontiac thought he was joking, but looked into it. It was clear he wasn't after. He made a joke, said, well, maybe we should call it the Trummer, because GM makes the Hummer. But Trump didn't laugh and said, here's my card, look into it and call me. And the guy said, I looked into it, but there was no record of his name bringing success to anything, so we didn't do it. But within a year of the show, companies were just lining up, including Phillips Van Heusen, Macy's, all these very big national consumer brands to give him money just to use the name, the value that had been created by the show.
Yeah. You write in the book that we're in a world where fame, detached from any other marketable talent or skill, is a highly compensated vocation. Does that explain his success in your view?
I mean, I think that's a really complicated, his success is a complicated soup, right?
But what's the big driver for it? Is it this idea that he was able, is he a marketer really? more than a businessman.
Yeah, that's how I kind of came to feel about it. I mean, you look at the fame and just the money that it drew, just his name on something, his association with something would at least draw eyeballs, if not sales.
And it's a Potemkin village because there's not a lot underneath.
Right.
It's this idea that he's a successful businessman. It's not that he actually is one.
And he also found some things he tried to sell, they failed. He was starting to put his name on anything, and I think it became damaging to him. But there was just...
And also, I think, like, if you look at it over time, it's hard to not notice that there's something unique about the way Americans attach the idea of expertise to somebody. And, like, we touch on this in the book, that, like, if you're wealthy or you appear to be wealthy, he has signposts of wealth, even when there's all kinds of financial turmoil going on. We assign credibility and capability and intelligence to that person, and we're hesitant to challenge what appears to be their expertise. And I think he's benefited from that his entire life. Yeah. And I think that's why he fights so hard to look wealthy, because that means, in his mind even, and a lot of people in America, that he's great at whatever he says he's great on. Right. And that's been central to his sort of place in the culture for a lot of decades.
We found early in his career, and we would send the clips back and forth because we were just laughing, like he's all of a sudden, becomes famous early in his career effectively, and all of a sudden all these TV personalities are asking him his views on world affairs and stuff he knows nothing about, but they attached, because he had money, they attached, oh, he's smart, may have thoughts on all of this.
Right.
But in fact, we're not. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, he's a wealthy person, so he's a powerful person. So we should ask him what he thinks about foreign affairs.
Yeah.
Did you guys have any interactions with him when you were reporting this book? I know that he's now sent a cease and desist letter after an excerpt was published in the New York Times. What happened there? What's going on?
So it's a letter. It will, proceed in whatever legal course is going.
He has sued you before.
He has.
And I believe just had to pay a couple months ago all of your legal fees.
For the paper.
For the paper.
But it's also important to know, we did try and engage him during the book. Questions, a lot of questions, and hoped that he would engage, but he didn't. We wanted him to. But we also were lucky with Donald Trump. He's been living out loud most of his life, so there was an incredible rich just trove of information and documents and interviews to go back to. So in that sense, we were lucky, but he didn't engage us during the book.
Has he said, have you guys seen his campaign communications director, Stephen Chung's comment on your book? Okay, he called the book a desperate attempt to interfere in the election, lies, incoherent nonsense, either belongs in the discount bargain bin in the fiction section of the bookstore or should be repurposed as toilet paper.
It's unclear how he feels about it.
I don't want to assume anything, but I don't think that they've read the book.
I was quite certain he had not at that point, but I think they would say that no matter what they saw in it. And I think what that really means, and what we always see, is that this notion of Donald Trump is really central to his identity.
Right.
And Stephen knows it's going to make the boss angry, and he's going to react accordingly.
This is still something that he's very sensitive about. Is that something that you guys have found, that this really touches a nerve with him?
It came up at the presidential debate
again.
It came up a lot in 2000.
Kamala Harris brought it up in the debate, right?
He keeps going back to the I'm a self-made guy, and that his father was sort of this outer borough builder. It's so deep inside of him. Yeah. She was baiting him, and she brought it up and succeeded.
And he would deny the inheritance, which is a hard thing for him to deny because there's documents in support of it.
As you said, he has no shame, and I totally agree with you. I've thought about him for 10 years now, that is one of the remarkable things about him. Yeah. I think that there's two sides of that. One is that we as a society, again, have a difficult time saying to the face of someone who appears to be rich and successful, you're lying to me, right? And he has no problem lying to your face, even when you know he's lying to your face. And you put those two things together, and he creates a fantasy world that he inhabits.
Yeah. And he believes in the power of the lie. If the lie is said over and over and over, it eventually becomes fact. People will start to think it's true.
How much do we know about his financial situation now? I mean, we've got the Truth Social SPAC, which the numbers are down, I think 70% or something, but his stake is still valued at almost $2 billion. What do we know about how he's doing now?
we don't have a perfect window to it really for any particular time, but we know what the trend lines were, and they're not good. The businesses that look, after the Apprentice wellspring, he invested that money in himself instead of the stock market and tried to create the impression again that he was a successful businessman by building a tower in Chicago that he secretly declared worthless on his tax returns. It was such a failure. By buying some golf courses in the United Kingdom that we know were all losing money, and he was having to put money into them from his fame money. By renovating the old post office into a hotel, again, he was having to put $7 to $10 million a year in there to keep it open until he sold it off. So those were not good numbers, and he was taking that Apprentice money, which in 2011, that and the licensing money was $50 million in 1 year, and putting in a lot into those things. Well, all the Apprentice money went away. Almost all the licensing money went away when he declared his candidacy with the way he described Mexican immigrants, right? The rest of it evaporated. So that was all gone. A hotel that had paid him $30 million in Hawaii broke the relationships off with him. So the trend lines were all down, and he hasn't really replaced that with anything. And you see him now, it's much more smaller market thing, trying to monetize. I called it Martyr Inc. in a recent story, trying to monetize his sort of political persecution, right? And that's really what is at the center of Truth Social, is people believing they're persecuted because he's persecuted and we've got to prop him up. But that is the one thing that could save him. But if he starts to sell when that window opens up in a couple of days, it's going to be, it would drive the stock price down immediately. And he wouldn't even be able to unload all this shit.
Before it does. He said that he's not going to sell. But it sounds like he's back to merchandise, really. I mean, it's hats and mugs and books.
And crypto
and crypto,
The other thing to remember, we don't know how it's going to play out, but he's facing these regulatory fines, and the New York Attorney General is in excess of $400 million. We don't know what's going to happen on appeal, but if that goes through, he's going to have to write a check for that. So I think you're seeing there's a lot of headwinds that he's got.
What role do you think the media played in all of this? I mean, you write in the book a little bit about how the media didn't really look into his claims. I think it was the Wall Street Journal that reported that he had sold off all of his stock before a stock market crash without looking into it. Another outlet reported that he was a billionaire in the 1980s. What role do you think the media played in helping him make this myth?
I think that's an easy question, or to look at that today. I mean, there's two things. One is I don't think back then everybody thought that guy was going to be in the White House. And he was more an entertainer than he was a businessman. He did make the pages of the Wall Street Journal. He had businesses, but I don't think he was taken seriously like he was running a publicly traded company like Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley or Exxon. So I think he, at the time, got away with a lot because he was, within a privately held company. It was small, and I think people saw him more as a celebrity than they did as a sort of a serious businessman at the time. And I think that the real work in terms of what people like Russ or I were doing started when he ran for the presidency, but that was a different era then, and that's why we went back and looked at it all.
He was also there's a certain way we cover people who are trying to do something that comes with great responsibility. Like Donald Trump had never done that. He was never taking over a public corporation. He was never really an important part of our public affairs. But he was fun, right? And
that's the phone.
He answered the phone. He was always accessible. He said, look at my helicopter, look at my gold-plated apartment, look at my latest wife, girlfriend, mistress, whatever. And that's the way he was covered. So when he says, I'm a multi-billionaire and I have all this stuff all over the world, there's really not a reason to go in and check that. He's not applying for a loan from you. You're just describing somebody
for president.
Colorful.
He wasn't running for president.
Exactly. This is a tough question, but you guys have exposed an extraordinary amount of information, private information about Trump's financial situation. A lot of potential fraud and an extraordinary amount of dishonesty. Why do you think it hasn't had an impact on public opinion about him? And is it frustrating to see him still potentially being reelected president, having done such an enormous amount of work exposing this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think it probably has had an impact. I think, though, when you look at Donald Trump, I think people just take away from him what they want, and they're sort of willing to believe some of that story, but also maybe they see it, oh, he's a fraudster, but oh, he's good on whatever issue you care about. And so I think that as voters, I think they're either not going to believe it or they're going to look the other way. I mean, that's a bit how I process it. They see him, they see he's, had all this legal trouble. He's, we recently had the criminal case in New York, and either they're going to think he's being, wrongly persecuted, or they're just going to say, well, I like him because he's good on this.
I mean, I don't think I've never started looking into something or finished something with the idea that it's going to create some specific outcome.
Right, of course not. Yeah,
you do it because it's fascinating and it feels important, and you hope other people will follow you along. That it's fascinating and feels important,
story.
right? And when it's really hard, it makes it all the more kind of interesting, right? So it did that, and then it's this. Again, it just turns into this great epic drama, I think, of a particular life in America, a particular family over the course of a century. It tells us, as we say in the book, as much about us as a country as it does about him. And I think that in part gets at what you're talking about. That's part of the magic story of his life.
Right.
Is why do all these bad things happen? And then why do all these lucky things happen? But yet he still remains firmly embedded with a particular image in our culture among a large number of people.
That segues very nice.
It's just a great story.
Right.
That's what I really loved about it, and I loved about the book. I mean, it happened to be Donald Trump, but it was just this epic story of a man, of a family, and just everything that bound them or didn't. I mean, really an incredible tale.
That segues very nicely to my last question, which is, the title of the book is Lucky Loser. And it's about the fact that this man is being incredibly lucky with these breaks throughout his life, and was born into extraordinary wealth, and still managed at many turns to lose money and bankrupt businesses, etc. Yet at the end of the day, Trump won. He was elected president of the United States. He was the 45th president of the United States. What do you think that says about America? And is this something that you thought about when you were reporting out this book? That someone who has had that career was able to attain the highest office in the land?
Wow, that's a big question. Well done. That's a really big question.
The book is a little bit longer than I imagine you're going to be able to answer this question. So if anyone wants to get the full answer, it's in the book. But
say the last part of that again. What does it say?
What does it say about America?
Right.
That a man who had this career was able to defy those obstacles, losing all that money, bankrupting those businesses, having the media cover this stuff about him, and was able to attain the highest office in the land.
I think, look, the presidency isn't really a meritocracy, right? We want to think we're picking the absolute best person out of 330 million people, but we're really not, right? It's a mix of, the first thing most candidates strive for is name recognition. Well, Donald Trump's had name recognition since he was 24 years old, right? It's not really a test of who's the best, but it does bring to light a lot of things that are not great about our whole economic system and our whole political system, and we're not as great as we want to think we are at vetting someone's potential before they walk into that office. Donald Trump was still an enigma to most people, I think, when he first walked into the White House. And we learned after the fact that what we saw there, and I hope through this book, is who he had been if we had been able to do all that spade work, and that was that tight window in 2016.
Yeah. Suzanne?
I don't think people knew what's in our book. A lot of it, I think, for the American people when they went to vote. I mean, they saw the person that Mark Burnett had created, and I think there was a segment of society that saw him in New York and knew the tabloid guy and the infidelities and the bankruptcies. But I think a lot of people thought that was well in his past, and he was the successful person that Mark Burnett had created.
Right.
But I agree, the presidency isn't a meritocracy at all.
Right.
I'd like to add that I think your question was smarter than our answers.
No.
Stop us now.
Suzanne Craig and Russ Buettner, the book is called Lucky Loser, How Donald Trump Squandered His Father's Fortune and Created the Illusion of Success. Thanks so much for coming on Press Club.
Thank you.